You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I didn't really expect to be jumping back into ICR so fast, but at the time of my writing this, they had only a few days ago said more dumb things about dinosaurs. And you know I can't pass that up. Today it's Trey and Dr. Timothy Clarey. So again, they have a paleontology guy, Brian Thomas, but they have the geology guy here instead. I don't know why they keep doing this, but oh well, here's Trey and Tim.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Creation Podcast. I am your host, Trey, and I have with me today podcast regular and ICR resident geologist, Dr. Tim Clarey.
Still a weird choice. Was Thomas just not available?
Oh, it's great being here again, Trey.
Yes, and we, of course, love having you on here. Normally, we talk about rocks or something like that. Today, we're going to talk about something a little different.
I haven't seen even close to all of these, but so far it seems like typically they have on people to talk about things that aren't really what they actually know most about. So does he actually usually talk to Clarey about rocks? I mean, the last time they were talking to former geneticist Jeffrey Tompkins about rocks. Now he's going to talk to former geologist Timothy Clarey about fossils? Why do they do this? And it's not just the Institute for Creation Research either. Answers in Genesis does the same thing.
Because you're not just a geologist, you do have a vested passion when it comes to dinosaurs.
That's
correct?
a good way to put it. Yeah, that's true.
This is not the first time Clarey has been on the channel to talk about dinosaurs. The last time that I remember, he was actually on with Brian Thomas doing some Q&A while the ICR Museum was shut down due to COVID restrictions. Based on that, I'd say that his special passion is specifically lying about dinosaurs.
I did a lot of sort of self-study on dinosaurs.
Me too.
As a geologist, you normally take a paleontology class, but normally it's like the invertebrates, that's the little clams and seashells without backbones.
Yep, because those are what most index fossils are. And so if the only reason you're looking at fossils is to tell about the geology of a formation, and not so much about the biology at the time the formation was laid down, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to look at animals like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs tended to be too geographically restricted to make good index fossils. Ideally, an index fossil should have a global distribution.
That's what you see most commonly to help you tell which rock layer is which. And sometimes the fossils do help you sort things out.
An admission from a creationist that index fossils actually are a good way to tell at a glance what part of the stratigraphic column a rock came from? Oh, frabjous day! Kalu Kalay! This is very uncommon in my experience. But I wonder how young Earth creationism can account for the very existence of index fossils. You see, the problem is that there are really only two ways that young Earth creationists explain the sequence of organisms in the fossil record: ecological zonation and hydrodynamic sorting. The first one says that more or less the fossil record is the result of different organisms from different environments being buried progressively as the floodwaters rose during Noah's flood. So they say the Cambrian was a shallow water environment, whereas perhaps the Cretaceous was in the uplands. The problem for this is that the fossil record simply isn't sorted that way. If the Cretaceous is supposed to be a record of higher elevation organisms than the Cambrian, then why are the mosasaurs and giant sea turtles like Archelon in the Cretaceous rocks, and not, say, the Cambrian rocks? And of course, this is also the case specifically for index fossils. Many of them are marine invertebrates. So no, the fossil record isn't sorted ecologically. Hydrologic sorting claims that fossils are sorted by size, shape, and density based on which fossils would sink fastest. But again, that's simply not true. Extremely light pterosaurs are found lower than heavy lumbering ankylosaurs. And looking at a chart of various tiny shelly organisms used as index fossils reveals no hydrodynamic pattern. Nothing about the fossil record, including index fossils, is well explained by anything young Earth creationists have put forward to date.
But a lot of geologists don't really get to study dinosaurs, but I had the chance when I taught at a college for many years to do kind of self-imposed internships where I went and dug for a week or 2 weeks here and there and really looked over the literature, trying to put together a little lab book on dinosaurs. So I tried to look at both sides of the situation, like warm-blooded versus cold-blooded, and did they feathers or not feathers.
And then he surprisingly came to all the worst conclusions available to young Earth creationism. How shocking. It's almost as if he didn't actually care to weigh the evidence and do a deep investigation. In fact, as we'll see, he doesn't even know how to identify a dinosaur as such. Instead, what it seems like is that Clarey simply looked at some papers as opposition research.
And so I tried to, and I didn't tell the students, of course, what I really believed.
Right.
I just laid it out there and said, here's the evidence. What do you think? And that kind of thing. And that bothered him a bit.
What bothered them? The overwhelming evidence for feathers on dinosaurs? The excellent evidence for at least mesothermy, if not full-blown endothermy in dinosaurs? Including dinosaurs that would have experienced regular snowfall like Cryolophosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, or Eutyrannus? Why would that upset them? Of course, I know why. It's because he was also spouting bullshit from the likes of Alan Fiducia and Theogarten Lingam Soliar.
Because they're like, I want the answer. I'm like, well, there might not be an answer. You know, maybe we don't know of these extinct animals.
What's
exactly
your conclusion?
What they were, so.
Yeah.
So I have strong feelings. I think
Right.
some of the evidence supports one way or the other.
Yeah, the evidence only supports one side. Some dinosaurs had feathers, and some were mesothermic at least, and many were almost certainly endothermic.
But it's very difficult to study an extinct animal, a whole kind of animal. All the dinosaurs are apparently extinct today.
Only if you just decide to be needlessly wrong about birds. The only reason the creationists seem to reject that birds are dinosaurs is that it implies evolution, but it doesn't do so any more than whales being mammals does. Creationists could simply accept that the multiple bird kinds are part of a larger category called dinosaur. They are already happy to say that ankylosaurs, sauropods, and hadrosaurs are all dinosaurs, despite not sharing any evolutionary ancestry with each other, according to them. All they would have to do is add groups like columbids and corvids to the group.
So it's hard to really know.
Except for Komodo dragons. I'm just kidding. No, I'm
Well,
just
they're-
kidding.
yeah. No, it's okay.
It's okay.
They're a little different, but
They're a little different. Okay.
No, they are extremely different and are not dinosaurs in any way. They're the biggest living lizards, but dinosaurs are not lizards. Indeed, dinosaurs evolved long before lizards did.
So we are talking about dinosaurs, but we're not just talking about dinosaurs. We're talking about dinosaurs in relationship to birds.
So I'm going to keep up the theme of comparing these arguments to arguments about why whales may or may not be mammals.
Now, we are not talking about feathers. We do have a podcast a number of episodes ago where we discuss feathers and whether or not dinosaurs had feathers. And so you can go watch that. We'll link it here.
Here's my evidence that some dinosaurs had feathers.
Today we're going to talk about brains. Okay. Evolutionists, of course, push this idea that dinosaurs over time evolved and became birds.
I hate how that's phrased. Birds are a single lineage of dinosaurs. It's not as if dinosaurs all collectively started evolving into birds. That's not how evolution works. Think about how weird it would be if you said that mammals evolved into whales. Most of them obviously did not do that. The same is true for dinosaurs and birds. Now, if in the future all mammals besides whales went extinct, it would still be weird to say that mammals evolved into whales, since again, the vast majority did not. It's just that the vast majority also went extinct.
One of the ways that they do this is by comparing bird brains with dinosaur brains.
I guess so, but it's pretty minor. I've literally never read a paper making this argument as some kind of wonderful evidence for the link. Usually it's skeletal, pulmonary, and integumentary links between birds and other dinosaurs. But sure, brains. Let's do it.
Which is interesting because it's like, do we have an actual dinosaur brain?
Well, yes, because all birds have actual dinosaur brains. But what we have are endocasts of dinosaur brain cases. That is, the negative space of the brain case is turned into a solid object that approximates the size and shape of the animal's brain, since most craniates have brain cases that are only a bit bigger than the brains that are housed in them.
Particularly certain theropod brains, like the T-Rex, which I guess they consider to be some of the most bird-like, or that type of dinosaur.
Theropod is a big category, and it is one to which birds belong. But T-Rex is not a particularly bird-like dinosaur. More bird-like dinosaurs include ornithomimids, oviraptorosaurs, and dromaeosaurs, which are a group that is so bird-like that creationists go back and forth on whether they're birds or dinosaurs, and they often split them so that some such dinosaurs are called birds, and not dinosaurs by them, while others are seen as dinosaurs and not birds.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted. Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
So what is this all about? Why is this happening? Why is this comparison happening?
Well, unfortunately, they don't really compare the data too much.
Here's a fun fact. The book The Rocks Were There by R.J. Downard and Jackson Wheat is essentially an 827-page literature review of creationist literature spanning decades. One of the most important conclusions it reaches is that in any given field, creationists on average only ever deal with about 10% of the available and relevant data. While it is true that real scientists do miss out on data sometimes, and that can even lead them to incorrect conclusions, they at least try. 10% means you didn't try. It is mathematically demonstrable that between scientists and creationists, it is the scientists who are doing the data comparison.
Okay.
They kind of put it in, their ideas get put forth in the movies like in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, all that series. That's, a lot of that was done by Jack Horner.
This is the exact same energy as a Flurf complaining that all movies just portray the world as a globe. Well, yeah, because we know that's how it is. Now, I'll say we probably don't know as much about dinosaurs with the same level of confidence that we know that the Earth is a globe, but movies want to portray dinosaurs the way people think of them, and people are becoming more and more aware that birds are dinosaurs, and that many dinosaurs were far more like a modern eagle than a modern Komodo dragon. In fact, all of them were, especially the eagles.
And you're getting, he was kind of the dinosaur advisor in those movies, at least for a while. I'm not sure if he did the last few.
Specifically, Jack Horner was the consultant for all the movies in the franchise except Jurassic World Dominion. As of the day I am writing this, there are 6 movies in the franchise that have been released, so he consulted on 5 of them.
But nonetheless, those are his views that he was putting out there, so you see things changing.
Yes and no. I can assure you that it's not his view that Stegosaurus had no beak, or that Dilophosaurus was a tiny, frilled, poison-spitting guy. The franchise is primarily a summer blockbuster science fiction action franchise, and if paleontological accuracy conflicts with what the director, producers, or studio thinks will make a more profitable movie, then Jack Horner's input can be and has been ignored. In fact, while I appreciate that the film Jurassic Park reinvigorated enthusiasm for, and to some degree knowledge of dinosaurs in the 1990s, by bringing much of the cutting-edge paleontology of the late 1980s onto the screen, by and large, now some 30 years later, the franchise has barely moved past the 1980s in terms of depiction of most dinosaurs. At this point, I would argue that the franchise is holding back the public's knowledge of dinosaurs, and is no longer advancing it.
Even in some of the movies, whether they could see people or smell people or vice versa, how fast they could run. Some of that was in flux because they're always having to go back and do better, computer models and estimate could they run, et cetera.
Yep, paleontology is an area in which many things are under active research, meaning that we don't know all the answers. But then again, other things are not really under active research because we do know them. For example, I don't expect a paper anytime soon arguing that, in fact, Tyrannosaurus rex had 3 fingers instead of 2. But that's what's true in any field of science.
Well, one of the things they always portray is, of course, that dinosaurs are very smart. Mm-hmm. And they can open doors.
Yes, that is one of the things that is not very accurate. I can't say exactly how smart Mesozoic dinosaurs would have been. Indeed, it's hard to even say that about modern dinosaurs, because intelligence is very hard to quantify in a meaningful way. But there is absolutely no way that Velociraptor or Deinonychus or any other dromaeosaurid was as smart as a chimpanzee. Now, for a late Cretaceous dinosaur, they were pretty smart, but that's kind of like being the biggest chihuahua. It's not all that impressive, except comparatively. I cannot find any evidence that Jack Horner accepted the idea of raptors as smart as chimps, which is taken from the book Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, on which the movie is based, rather than on science. In fact, I would be shocked if he thought that. But then, it makes them better Hollywood monsters, and their intelligence is plot relevant in virtually all of the movies, so I can see why filmmakers went with that aspect from the book, rather than basing it on real science.
And they can do things that birds do, like ravens can unlock things and figure things out, and they're very, very smart the way to get into things. And
Velociraptor and its relatives were probably much more on par with animals like ducks or pigeons or chickens.
Dinosaurs, they make them that way in the movies because they do want to push the idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds.
For fuck's sake, no, they don't. They do it because it makes for a fun antagonist. First, nothing about being smart as a dinosaur and there being smart birds today means that birds evolved from other dinosaurs. We're 66 million years removed from the last known non-avian dinosaurs. Birds could simply gain more cognitive ability during those tens of millions of years. The ancestors of humans clearly weren't as smart as crows at the end of the Cretaceous. Further, nothing about being intelligent prevents a lineage from going extinct. Homo erectus was intelligent and colonized virtually all of Africa and Eurasia as well as many islands. They went extinct. But also, raptors aren't on a line leading to modern birds. Birds in the broad sense evolved well before them in the Jurassic. They were the contemporary relatives of birds, not their ancestors. Rather like how tarsiers are contemporary relatives of humans, but not their ancestors. So even if velociraptors were smarter than humans, it wouldn't do anything to make them more or less related to birds, nor would it provide evidence for or against birds being dinosaurs.
And that birds and dinosaurs are the same thing. That's the latest thing.
No, it's not. Let's go back to the whales and mammals, because that's a parallel case. Are mammals and whales the same thing? Well, no, obviously not. A human is a mammal, but clearly humans are not whales. But whales are mammals. Birds are a subset of dinosaur. Every bird has always been and will always be a dinosaur. But many dinosaurs were not birds. Velociraptor among them. This is just basic set theory, of the kind that has been understood for far longer than set theory has been formalized as a part of mathematics. This is the kind of thing small children are expected to understand. It's as basic as a child who can understand that their pet is a dog, but that not all dogs are their pet. Apparently, Clarey and Trey are operating at the level of toddlers.
Yeah, a chicken is just a T-Rex. I mean,
A chicken is a T-Rex in the same way that a human is a kangaroo, in that they're not. But they are both still mammals, and pointing out that they're different from each other doesn't change that.
I see it on, I say that in jest. I do see it online.
Does he, though? I have never seen anyone making the claim that chickens are T-Rex. I did once see a kid's website claiming that Tyrannosaurus were the ancestors of birds, which is flatly incorrect. But I can't even find that anymore, so it may be gone now. T-Rex and birds have their common ancestor at the base of Coelurosauria. But as already noted, there are many other coelurosaurs more closely related to birds than T-Rex, and T-Rex is just as closely related to an ostrich, a penguin, a parrot, or a hummingbird as it is to a chicken. If you want to make sure you always hear such high-level information as chickens are not T-Rex as soon as possible, consider pledging to my Patreon. It starts at only $1 a month, and you get access to all my scripted videos early, as well as the super secret Discord server. You also get a 15% discount if you pledge annually instead of monthly.
Oftentimes, people will just offhandedly be like, the chicken is the descendant of the dinosaur, you know?
Well, yes, if you're part of a wider group, you descend from members of that group. Just like if you're a human, you descend from mammals, whether or not evolution is true.
And they've been trying for, over a decade now, trying to take a chicken egg and tweak its DNA enough to make it into a dinosaur, and that's really been unsuccessful.
Well, by they, Clarey means Jack Horner, who is really the only person who was ever trying. But they have managed to get chicken embryos with teeth, which is something. Personally, I think the whole project is silly since a chicken is already a dinosaur, and since there are some serious ethical questions about the whole endeavor. And I further suspect that any embryos brought to term may have miserable lives full of suffering. Now, I'm not an animal rights advocate in the sense that I think that all animal testing and use of animal products must be abolished, but I am also against needless cruelty to animals, and the Chickensaurus idea seems like it would be that. I think anyone using animals for experimentation should be keenly aware that any suffering on the part of their test subjects is directly at their feet, and that their test subjects are both innocent and incapable of consenting to participate. I consider that a heavy ethical burden, and as a result, I do not think animal experimentation should be conducted unless it is strictly necessary. That being said, sometimes, especially early on in medical testing or in genetic studies, we really do need model organisms, and using humans would be either impossible or the greater evil. In such cases, animals should be used. Anyway, that whole thing got away from me a bit, so let's get back to Tim.
Good, because we see what happens in Jurassic Park.
So I don't think we have to worry about
Right.
a chicken hatching a dinosaur or anything like that.
Right.
Every chicken that has ever hatched has been a dinosaur. But yeah, I don't think that if Jack Horner succeeds, we will have to worry about the resultant organisms going on a rampage. I suspect that they would be more pathetic than scary.
I think they were completely different animals, completely different kinds.
Ah yes, the classic creationist term, kind. There is simply no rigorous way to determine what a kind is. Here Clarey says that dinosaur and bird are separate kinds, but then most creationists would say that doves and crows are different kinds, as are stegosaurs and ankylosaurs. Yes, they agree that doves and crows are both birds, and the stegosaurs and ankylosaurs are still dinosaurs. This still works with whales. No creationist I'm aware of thinks that cheetahs and fin whales are in the same kind, but they acknowledge both as mammals.
Even different creation days. Birds are created on day 5. All land animals like dinosaurs would be day 6. And so they're completely different. And God specifies that in his creation.
This has never made sense to me as an argument. What day were flightless birds like ostriches and penguins made? Presumably day 6. But then most birds were supposedly made on day 5. Does this make ostriches not birds? When were lizards made? Presumably day 6. But then wouldn't mosasaurs, which are lizards, be made on day 5 since they're sea creatures? What about whales? I would presume they are day 5 creatures, but then most mammals are land creatures which would have been made on day 6. The Bible describes the order of creation of animals based on their habitat and mode of locomotion, not based on their taxonomy. Now, of course, there was no 6-day creation, but even if we accept that there was a 6-day creation, this argument doesn't even make sense on its own terms.
Account in the Bible.
So
but,
birds came first.
right, birds actually are around first.
Okay.
And so you have birds and then dinosaurs.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
And ironically, I think maybe God did it that way for the reason that he knew that scientists in this day and age would say that dinosaurs evolved into birds.
No, it's because the people who wrote Genesis 1 were trying to make an update to the story in Genesis 2 to make God seem less weak and ignorant and more powerful and wise. They had no clue what a dinosaur even was, how geology worked, how biology worked, what anything in the sky was, what the shape of the earth is, etc. Look, we know for a fact that Genesis 1 and 2 are not only contradictory, but neither is literally true. Even Clarey knows this. It's not like he accepts the idea of a beaten-out solid dome over the earth, something Genesis unambiguously says God made and put in place over the earth.
And we do see birds in the rock record way down here below, in layers below, well below, where the most supposedly bird-like dinosaurs are.
Really? Okay.
Birds show up in the Jurassic, along with other coelurosaurs, including tyrannosauroids. It's true that coelurosaurs were not as prevalent until the Cretaceous, but it's simply a lie to imply that there is some temporal paradox when it comes to birds and bird-like dinosaurs. And that's only if you go with a loose definition of bird. If we go with crown birds, those probably only show up in the Albian stage of the early Cretaceous. So there's even less of a supposed temporal paradox. This is based on the diversion time of Paleognathae and Neognathae, the two biggest divisions in extant birds.
Most of those are, dinosaurs are found in 3 layers, or the flood layers, as they were buried, and their zone was kind of flooded by the waves that were coming in. You have Triassic.
The Triassic isn't a layer. It's composed of multiple strata, themselves often composed of multiple laminae. Calling the Triassic an entire geological era a layer is like calling North America a city.
That's where you see dinosaurs showing up for the first time in the rocks, and then you see in the Jurassic layers above that, and the Cretaceous layers above that, and then they're kind of gone. That's the so-called dinosaur extinction.
Well, most dinosaurs are gone. Birds persist, of course.
Okay.
But the most bird-like ones are supposedly in the Cretaceous, the last of the dinosaurs. And then but we see birds already in the Jurassic.
No, we don't. Not if by bird we mean member of Aves. Instead, what we see are, in fact, very bird-like dinosaurs like Archaeopteryx, which creationists just say are birds without any nuance. In fact, the most bird-like dinosaurs we see are in the Cretaceous because that's when we get to groups like Picostylia. For example, Protopteryx is the earliest known picostylian, and it is from the early Cretaceous. It's not even a bird as we think of it, being an enantiornithine. So in the strictest sense, it's still not a bird, as in a crown bird. It is a stem bird. The reason so many bird-like dinosaurs are in the Cretaceous is because Coelurosauria outcompeted other groups through the Cretaceous, groups like Carcharodontosaurs, meaning that by the late Cretaceous, most terrestrial carnivorous megafauna were relatively close relatives of birds, like dromaeosaurs. And even some of the herbivores and generalist omnivores were too, such as avomimids and oviraptorids. But these are not birds. They are relatives of birds, and no one is suggesting in the literature that modern birds descend from any of them. The line leading to birds had already diverged long before that, but since the common ancestor of birds and avomimids, oviraptorosaurs, and dromaeosaurs was already feathered, these other groups maintain this.
In the middle layers. And so in their worldview, that's 40 to maybe 70 million years of time. You already have birds buried with dinosaurs, then they evolved into birds that were already there. So it's...
In the year of our Lord 2006, John D. Morse, the son of Henry Morse, penned an article for the Institute of Creation Research called If Apes Evolved into Humans, Why Do We Still Have Apes?, published Wednesday, November 1st, and which is linked in the description. In it he wrote, quote, Evolution does not propose that all members of a type evolved into another type, but only that a small group of individuals, genetically isolated from the others, evolved, leaving the others to remain the same. End quote. The fact that one replaced humans with birds and apes with dinosaurs does not suddenly mean that the younger Dr. Morris's points about why this is a bad argument are invalid. Further, let's bring this back to whales. If whales evolved from terrestrial artiodactyls, then how are there still pigs and deer and giraffes? Well, because not all artiodactyls evolved into whales. That's it. That's all there is to it.
Kind of like having the grandchild before the grandparent. Yes.
No, it's more like having 2 third cousins being neighbors.
But then they kind of weasel through that, which I call weaseling because it's made up.
Right.
They actually will dash lines down and say, well, there's an ancestor to both somewhere down below. We just haven't found it.
So does Clarey, though. So do virtually all creationists. ICR, along with all the major young Earth creationist organizations, all believe that Noah, rather than taking wolves and coyotes and red foxes and painted dogs and tanukis and Maine wolves and dholes and short-eared dogs and crab-eating foxes, etc., only took on a pair of canids that then diversified into modern species of canines. But what was that organism specifically? Creationists don't know, and that's okay. You don't need to point to the actual body of an ancestor to know the ancestor existed. All humans share common ancestry if you go back far enough. If you're a human, then you can pick any other human on Earth, and you two share a common ancestor. Let's just assume young Earth creationism for a bit. Clarey knows that at the very least, everyone shares Noah and his wife as ancestors, even if they otherwise share none. But he also knows that most people share much more recent common ancestors. The name Clarey is ultimately of Irish origin, and I bet that Tim here thinks he shares much more recent common ancestry with all Irish people than he does with, say, any of the Sand people of South Africa. And he's almost certainly right about that. But let's say I pick Timothy Clarey and Simon Harris, the current Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland. I bet Clarey and I would agree that he and Simon Harris share a fairly recent common ancestor. At a guess, I would say that we probably would not need to go much farther back than about, say, 500 years. 500 years ago, it was the year 1524, and the population of Ireland was about 800,000, at least according to Wikipedia, which is as far as I'm going for this, since this is just a thought experiment. Now, if we assume an average generation time of 30 years, which is a bit too long, but makes the math easy, we get 20 generations. Since each generation doubles the number of ancestors in the family tree at that level, we find that 20 generations ago, there should be 2 to the 20th ancestors, or 1,048,576. Since this is larger than the population of Ireland at the time, we can be well assured that any 2 Irish people whose ancestry is primarily Irish rather than recent immigrants will share a common ancestor 500 years ago or sooner. Okay, so now we know that Simon Harris and Timothy Clarey probably had a most recent common ancestor that lived 500 years ago or so, and there's a fair chance it was significantly more recently. So, who was this person? Where are they buried? What county did they live in? What was their name? Well, we don't know. We probably can't know. Irish parish baptismal records only go back to the late 1600s, so it would be virtually impossible to go all the way back to the early 1500s. But here's the thing. Despite not knowing the name of the common ancestor between Clarey and Harris, we know there was one. That's because we know how genetics works. We know about the history of human migration. We have very good reason to know this. Similarly, in evolution, we have all the evidence of common ancestry, including shared derived characteristics, transitional fossils, and among extant and relatively extinct animals, we even have the genetic evidence. There is no need for direct physical evidence of the ancestor of 2 organisms in order to know that such an organism existed. It's true in human ancestry, and it's true in evolution. Indeed, there is no physical evidence of the ancestral population of, say, all South American canids, and yet they all group together. And so even according to Clarey, they should have a post-flood most recent common ancestor that is not ancestral to, say, all the members of genus Vulpes, the Old World foxes. Clarey is special pleading. He requires far more evidence for some claims of common ancestry than for others, and not because of some evidential reason, but simply because some claims make him uncomfortable. Because at some point, the friction between common ancestry and the Ark story becomes too much for him, and he has to reject some of them.
And so again, that's not really science.
Timothy Clarey is on the board of directors for the Creation Research Society. The Creation Research Society publishes the Creation Research Society quarterly. In 2023, they published an article titled The Uniqueness of Ruminants Ruminantia Among the Even-Toed Ungulates Artiodactyla. Part 1, Molecular Baraminology Studies, by Jean K. Leitner and Matthias Serhadi. In this article, the authors conclude that among ruminants such as Tragulidae, the mouse deer, Antilocapridae, the pronghorns, Giraffidae, the giraffes and okapis, Bovidae, cattle, sheep, antelopes, and goats, and Moschidae, the musk deer, there were probably 2 created kinds, although their confidence level was not particularly high. This paper involved absolutely no paleontology whatsoever. They did not even look for physical evidence of a common ancestor between, say, sheep and cows. So if assuming an ancestor on the basis of common ancestry isn't science, then that's Clarey telling you that his own journal publishes what he himself does not consider science.
You can't test something that's unknown and never has been found, and probably never will be.
Then I have to wonder what Timothy Clarey is doing publishing papers that do exactly that. Has he objected to the publishing of barremonology papers? Barremonology being the poorly named pseudoscience of pretending that kinds are detectable? Not that I can find. Timothy Clarey is a hypocrite.
It's okay to look, but to base your interpretation on something that's not there, that's not science.
Well, you heard it here. All inferences of common ancestry by creationists that do not involve actual physical remains of at least a member of an ancestral population are not science. Looks like the ark is going to have to get a whole lot bigger on the inside, because assuming that all canids or all felids or all varanids or all columbids have a common ancestor is now scientific until physical remains of the common ancestor of these families are found.
And so the science supports that birds and dinosaurs were alive at the same time.
Just like the science supports that other artiodactyls and whales were all alive at the same time.
Okay. So I guess my question is, since we're talking about the brains.
Oh yeah, I forgot. This was supposed to be specifically about brains. Oops.
What is it potentially about dinosaur brains and bird brains that could, that evolutionists could feasibly latch onto of this is evidence,
Well, birds have the same parts of the brains as all other dinosaurs, and many early birds like Ichthyornis had brains that were essentially the same as their non-avian theropod cousins, like tyrannosaurs, although tyrannosaurs had enormous olfactory bulbs, unlike most dinosaurs.
Well, when you look at the actual brain endocast, they're called, where you can find the brain cavity kind of in the skull of the dinosaurs.
Because we don't have an actual dinosaur brain.
No, there's no even preserved tissue. I don't think we found any preserved tissues, which is possible they may find some.
As far as I know, this is correct. No full or partially fossilized non-avian dinosaur brains have been found. But the brain case is usually not much bigger than the brain, and is usually shaped very similarly to the brain. So if you turn the negative space of the brain case into positive space, you get a pretty good model of the brain of an organism. But I want to point out that here Clarey is fine with inferring brain shape despite not having actual physical brains to look at. It's almost like his idea that we need direct physical evidence before we accept that a thing existed, that he has used in his objection to inferring ancestry, is not a consistent stance, and he only uses it to pretend that the parts of science he doesn't like don't count.
But the actual size of it, they have to estimate from the skull, and they do these endocasts. They do CT scans, and they can kind of get a pretty good idea of the size of the brain, at least the maximum size.
Yep.
And I did this. There's an endocast that I purchased a copy of, 158 cc's it came out to be. Now, to put that in relation to a human brain, which is about, I think human brains average 1,200 cc's.
One trick is to tell them stories that don't go anywhere. Like the time I caught the ferry over to Shelbyville, I needed a new heel for my shoe. So I decided to go to Morganville.
So you're looking 158, you're looking at about 10 times smaller for a full-size, 40-foot long T-Rex compared to yours and my brain. At about a tenth of the size of our brain.
It's a pretty small brain.
The average Mesozoic dinosaur was not smart by today's standards. I, of course, am an exception to this.
And birds, same size bird to same size dinosaur, small dinosaur to small birds, in relation to that, they'd be about 10 times smaller.
Nope, many animals that are not even in aves have more typically dinosaurian brains, such as Archaeopteryx and Ichthyornis. They were big for dinosaur brains, but not nearly as big on average as most true birds of that size.
And the shape of the brain, to me, the shape of that, when they see the endocast, the shape of the brain is a long, kind of a skinny thing that looks just like alligator and crocodile brains.
Right, like the brains of Archaeopteryx and Ichthyornis. Also, of course, since birds are dinosaurs and dinosaurs share a common archosaur ancestor with crocodilians, we should expect that non-avian dinosaur brains should look a lot like crocodile brains, and that so should our earliest birds in a broad sense. What do you know, but that the anatomy of these animals is exactly what you should expect from evolution.
And so the brain isn't shaped like a bird's brain. A bird brain is compact, has a huge rounded part for processing data.
It's the cerebellum, and yes, birds have much larger cerebellums than other dinosaurs. But that's like saying spider monkeys can't be monkeys because their limbs are too long. What about having a part of one's anatomy that's larger than normal for the group one belongs to means that one isn't part of that group? Dolphins have a much larger cerebrum than other artiodactyls like deer or giraffes. Does that mean that they're not artiodactyls? Indeed, their cerebrum is larger than virtually any mammals apart from humans. Does this make them not mammals? Look at this cladogram with illustrative brain endocasts. It's arranged so that as you read down the list, you get more and more bird-like taxa, until you just get to birds. I don't know about you, but that looks like a pretty obvious transitional sequence of brains with fundamentally the same parts to me, but with the sizes of those parts changing. In fact, you might notice that A, B, and C all look very similar, and A is a troodontid, a non-bird Deinonychosaur, B is Archaeopteryx, an avialan that has retained many basal dinosaur traits, and C is an ostrich. That's right, ostriches, actual birds, have brains that are essentially indistinguishable from what Clarey is calling dinosaur brains.
Birds can pick out food from a pile of rocks and debris. They can pick out exactly what they want to eat, whereas alligators just bite.
Right.
Ask questions later, so to speak, and see what it tasted like.
Yep, birds sure aren't alligators. You'll get no argument from me there. Another group that are not alligators are my subscribers. So if you're not an alligator, why not hit subscribe and turn on all notifications so that you're always notified when I have new content?
If it's something they like the taste of, then they'll swallow it. But maybe they could smell better, but I don't think they could process information that they can't. Alligators aren't known for opening doors like they show in Jurassic Park.
Even if alligators were smart enough to figure out doorknobs, they don't exactly have the anatomy to reach that high and carefully manipulate things. This is just a whole lot of irrelevant stuff about a group of animals that aren't even dinosaurs.
Right.
They can't figure all that out. They're not built to think that way. God built them to, look for their food. Originally, of course, it would have been just vegetation in the original created world, but then it became distorted after Adam and Eve sinned, and the fall happened, then dinosaurs started eating each other.
Yes, because of course you need to be built as a stealthy aquatic reptile who can't effectively process any plant matter beyond the occasional fruit, so that you can be an ambush hunter of pumpkins, I guess? That makes lots of sense. Nothing says herbivore like ambush predator.
And but they still can't think like birds do. And their brain is completely different shape, and that's really not talked about.
Except that it's not a different shape, really. It's just that birds have big cerebellums. And I think it's a bit telling that while I have shown pictures of both fairly basal dinosaur brains, as well as avialan and even avian brains, ICR has not shown any so far. Could it be that if they actually had the brains on screen, that it would not really be a compelling case because of how clearly similar bird brains are to the brains of other theropods? In fact, as we've already seen, you basically can't tell the difference between the brain of a troodon and an ostrich.
They make them out to be smart.
Right.
They do all these things in the movies.
Things that no paleontologist has ever said were true to life. It's true that Jurassic Park had a paleontology advisor, but he didn't have veto power or anything. He wasn't like consul or tribune of the dinosaurs. He was just an advisor. In biblical terms, he was less like Joseph becoming the vizier, and more like Daniel becoming a dream interpreter and scholar in court. So, should you get your paleontology from Hollywood movies? No, you should not. Did any paleontologists affirm the ability of oversized velociraptors shaped like Deinonychus to open doors? No, they did not.
They talk about how smart they were, and they were like birds, and they are birds.
Nope, they're not birds. It's pretty simple. All whales are mammals, not all mammals are whales. Timothy Clarey is a mammal. Is Timothy Clarey a whale? No, he is not. All birds are dinosaurs. Not all dinosaurs are birds. Velociraptor is a dinosaur. Is Velociraptor a bird? No, it is not.
But yet their brain is completely shaped different, a completely different shape.
We have no idea how they act.
And that brain shape matches up with alligators and crocodiles.
Just like an ostrich brain. Neato. It's almost like, even in their brains, birds show that they are just as much a dinosaur as any Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops.
And so it's most likely that they behave like alligators and crocodiles.
Why, though? Why would a terrestrial, warm-blooded, active pursuit predator like Velociraptor have behavior that wasn't at all similar to a mostly aquatic, cold-blooded ambush predator like an alligator or crocodile? Just having a similarly shaped and sized brain doesn't really mean that two animals will have similar behavior. They might have similar cognitive abilities, but that's not the same thing.
And most likely, that implies they're also probably cold-blooded, like alligators and crocodiles. There's other things on that. Well, that's another whole podcast in itself.
Well, that would imply that ostriches are cold-blooded, but, they're not, though. Also, it's actually very likely that the ancestors of modern crocodilians were either mesothermic or endothermic, which is shown by the fact that they actually have the four-chambered heart you'd expect from a warm-blooded animal, like a bird or a mammal, but they bypass one of the chambers, making it functionally three-chambered. Why did God give these cold-blooded animals the heart of a warm-blooded animal only to tell them to just not use part of it? Why not give them a 3-chambered lizard heart?
But
We'll get to that eventually.
I think dinosaurs are mostly cold-blooded,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons why is the brain shape is just like alligators and crocodiles.
And I think that most lizards can fly, and my evidence for that is the shape of their livers. Brain shape has no necessary connection to metabolic rate, which is primarily the difference between cold-blooded exotherms, mesotherms, and warm-blooded endotherms. Turns out you can have a big brain and a fairly slow metabolism, or vice versa.
Nothing like a bird's brain shape at all. Because birds have to do more things. They're warm-blooded. They have to, identify their food, be able to pick it out more carefully.
Dude, they can even make enemies. Like you hear the stories of like ravens who are like, "Oh, that person's been mean to me. I will cause problems for them."
And the chickens, actually, if you ever raise chickens, they pick on. Usually one chicken gets picked on.
I really don't even understand the logic. Some birds can hold grudges, therefore birds aren't dinosaurs? What definition of dinosaurs precludes grudges?
They'll go around. They're not very nice at times. So you don't want to. I don't like people. Some people have a pet chicken. I'm like, I don't know about that.
I kept leopard geckos. They're dumber than a chicken. They were still fine pets. Indeed, very smart pets like cats, dogs, and ferrets can get into trouble a dumb pet wouldn't get into.
No, well, not for you.
But they're actually, they have a bigger brain for their body size, just like you and I, about 10 times bigger than a dinosaur's brain.
So a chicken weighs about 2,600 grams, and their brain weighs about 3.22 grams. That means that their brain is about 1.24% of their body mass.
And I actually plotted up that dinosaur T-Rex endocast that I had. I displaced it in water.
That means that if Clarey is right, then the brain of a velociraptor should, say, be only about 0.1% of the body mass of the animal. A big velociraptor has a mass a bit less than 20,000 grams, and we'll use the high end to make sure that this is more fair. This means that the mass of a velociraptor brain would have to be about 20 grams to make Clarey's statement reasonable. To show how small that is, brains have a density a bit higher than water, but we'll just assume the same density as water to make the math easier, as this is generous to the creationists. At that density, a velociraptor brain would have to be about half the size of a shot glass, or about 20 milliliters. Unfortunately, it seems that despite lots of people having measured velociraptor brains, no one bothered to actually give a volume for them. In fact, I now have a burning hatred for J. Logan King, Justin S. Silpa, Justin A. Gregori, Amy M. Balanoff, and James M. Neenan for their paper, The Endocranium and Trophic Ecology of Velociraptor mongoliensis, which reports the volume of Velociraptor's brain as 5.73 grams per cubic millimeter. You might not know this, but that's a density, not a volume. But the paper gives a minimum cerebrum width of 14.44 millimeters and a total endocast length of 22.79 millimeters. Since dinosaur brains are approximately cylindrical, I'll use 14.44 millimeters as the diameter and 22.79 millimeters as the height. This gives us a volume of about 3,700 cubic millimeters. Now, that is too big, so let's go down to 10% of that, which is a big reduction. Now we have 370 or so millimeters. Let's turn that into a mass by using our generous assumption that the density is that of water. So now we have 370 grams. That makes the approximate mass of Velociraptor's brain 1.8% of its body mass, which is slightly more than that of a chicken. So let's see. Clarey made the claim that chicken brains are 10 times as massive as the brain of a similarly sized dinosaur, by which he means non-avian dinosaur. I spent nearly 2 hours trying to see if that checks out, and lo and behold, it does not.
And it came up with about 158 cc's. That's the maximum size it could be.
Cool, but T-Rex is only distantly related to birds. If you want to actually test this, you have to use animals that are as much like birds as possible, since those would be the animals that best represent the non-bird ancestors of birds. You don't test if humans could have evolved from ancient apes by testing the brain size of gerbils. You look at other apes. T-Rex did indeed have a brain that was relatively tiny compared to a chicken. But guess what? Velociraptor is about as close to a bird as you can get before you get to Aviale, which is the widest group of organisms usually called birds, even though I don't like to call them that. Its brain is right in line with the brains of ostriches and chickens. Now granted, those are pretty dumb for birds, but that's the point. We have a continuum of brain sizes from the most bird-like dinosaurs all the way to modern birds.
It's filled the whole cavity. So it's probably a little bit smaller than that. When you plot that up on a graph of body size to brain size, it falls really close to the reptile line.
Okay.
Really close to the reptile line.
I don't believe you.
Cool. But then was that followed up with other increasingly bird-like groups, like maybe do the same for oviraptors, gallimimus, troodons, and velociraptor? Why cherry pick one not particularly bird-like Salurosaur? Oh, right, because creationists aren't honest researchers. They're fucking liars, who know that if they actually use as much data as they could, they'd be shown to be wrong. So they use as little as they can and cherry pick only the data that least obviously disproves them.
The bird line is, again, an order of magnitude or 10 times greater.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no doubt that if you measured some crocodilians, T-Rex, and then some neoavians, you get the neoavians on a distinctly higher distribution. But then you toss in paleonants, Galoenceroformes, Deinonychosaurs, Oviraptorosaurs, and Apomimids. Suddenly, you get a much smoother distribution. Once again, creationists just don't actually deal with the data. Even though they continually say that they and real scientists have the same data, it's just different interpretation.
And so you get two different graphs. And I actually wrote an ICR article on that. You can look up, I think it's called Tyrannosaurus Rex was no bird brain. And so you can search that at our website.
Search for it if you want, but T-Rex having a small brain is neither surprising nor meaningful in terms of the ancestry and taxonomy of birds.
But it actually talks about where I actually did the math and plotted it up and plotted the size. And again, you never see the conventional paleontologists doing that. They don't talk about the size of the dinosaur brains.
Searching dinosaur brain size on Google Scholar yields approximately 46,000 results. That is a number that is bigger than 0. So once again, Clarey is just flatly and obviously wrong.
They just make them out to be smart because they want them to be. But the real data supports the brains were smaller and shaped like alligators and crocodiles, not like a bird at all.
Okay.
As long as you ignore the bigger brain non-avian dinosaurs and the smaller brain birds. But then if you did that, you'd be committing academic fraud. So yeah, I'm saying Clarey is a fraud. That's just my opinion, though.
So this is not a question that I was ever intending to ask, but it now I think about it, is the whole concept of like the feathers in dinosaurs, has that stemmed after the fact of this whole bird thing, or was this kind of before?
I'm not sure what he's asking. Archaeopteryx is basically the first dinosaur/bird transitional fossil that was found, and it had feathers, and around that time is when the idea of birds being dinosaurs was first proposed. But we have learned a lot more about the taxonomic distribution of feathers and proto-feathers since then.
Are the feathers also a part of this whole, we've got to make them look like birds?
Yes, no, I believe so. And, you know, back in the 19th century, I think they started, Huxley pushed the idea of, Darwin's so-called bulldog. He's the guy that started pushing that dinosaurs turned into birds. And everybody forgot about that.
That's true.
I mean, it's not completely literally true, but yeah, the idea was ignored for about a century.
For about the next 80 years, till the 1960s, when they found Deinonychus. Mm-hmm. And they looked at the bones of Deinonychus, which is a kind of something like a very similar to a velociraptor, but bigger. And it's actually what's portrayed in the movies as velociraptor, because it's much bigger. But that was found by John Ostrom, I think, of Yale in the early 60s.
We have an animatronic, one of those, in our Discovery Center.
Then why did the editor cut to an animatronic Tyrannosaurus instead of an animatronic Deinonychus?
That's right. You can come, well, don't pet him, but you can come. He won't bite you.
He won't, yeah.
Because that's pre-fall.
Right.
So they would have eaten only vegetation.
It's off topic to cover how insanely idiotic the idea that Tyrannosaurus was chomping on vegetables until the fall is. I've covered it many times before, but just know that it's possibly one of the most idiotic takes that creationists have on zoology, and that's really saying something.
But nonetheless, he showed that, based on the body structure, that it was probably very agile and fast-moving.
Yes, which on its own requires a relatively high metabolism, which rather argues against Clarey's idea that dinosaurs were all cold-blooded.
And that started the so-called dinosaur renaissance, where they went from being just these cold-blooded, sluggish animals shuffling around the swamp all the time to now more agile and fast-moving dinosaurs. But it doesn't really mean that they're warm-blooded.
Yeah, it kind of does, though. Or at least it means that they were probably mesothermic. The thing is that to sustain a high level of activity requires a high level of energy expenditure per unit time. That's what metabolism is, the rate of energy usage by an organism. So the more consistently active an animal is, the higher its minimum metabolic rate must be. If that rate is high enough, it will make more heat than it loses to the environment in ambient conditions, and therefore not be cold-blooded.
Mm-hmm. Just that they're active. And even the bone studies that they've done, the bone histology, they slice bones and study the slivers of the bone. They show what looks like mammal bones almost in some of these dinosaurs because they were very active.
Oh, look, another reason to think that some dinosaurs were mesothermic or endothermic. How surprising.
Mm-hmm. That's all it shows. It doesn't show they're warm-blooded.
Gotcha.
And so you can, because they've done studies with modern-day reptiles, exercised, one set of them exercised them a lot. The other ones just let them lay around like reptiles do, like iguanas. And the ones that they exercised had bones like mammals in some regards. And so there's a lot of similarities. So it really just means they're active. Doesn't really show warm-blooded or cold-blooded.
I'm unaware of any such study. I don't even know why someone would do such a study. It would be great if there were a citation. You can always examine my sources early if you decide to join the channel memberships with the Join Channel button below this video. You get early access to my scripted videos as well as access to the super secret Discord server. Additionally, your name and comments and the live chat will be in green with a cool symbol next to it, and you'll have access to the special channel emojis. It all starts at just $1.99 a month.
Okay.
So, but the feathers are a natural thing. Of course, you're turning something into a bird. You want to grow feathers somehow along the line.
The somehow is from the skin.
So just going to add that.
And so in the last
yeah.
20, 30 years, they started finding these little hair-like structures coming off these imprints of these dinosaurs are buried so quickly that looks like little hair-like structures coming off, and they call those proto-feathers because they're already in their mind. They've already, thought that dinosaurs had to evolve feathers, some scales somehow.
The somehow is from the skin.
Right.
But other studies by other paleontologists, evolutionists have shown that those are, when you squish things like that, you just get collagen fibers coming off. So they're probably most likely collagen fibers and not proto-feathers after all.
By other evolutionists, he means Alan Fiducia and friends. Turns out that they're wrong, and everyone knows they're wrong, even including some creationist paleontologist larpers like Matt McLean. Here's a simple way to know that they're wrong. Collagen fibers do not contain melanosomes. Proto-feather impressions have fossilized melanosomes, so they're not collagen fibers. Indeed, we now know the color of some dinosaurs because of preserved melanosomes in their proto-feathers.
And they've actually shown in a study, I believe in 2017, that T-Rexes had scaly skin. They found lots of skin imprints of T-Rex.
Yes, but birds have scaly skin, so what?
And so you still see, though, unfortunately,
and that's the one
to
that's
this day,
supposed to be,
to this day, you still see renditions in museums and in movies and stuff with T-Rex with feathers or something sticking out of its head.
Yes. The only Tyrannosaurus skin impressions we have are from an adult, meaning that we do not know about the integument of juveniles. T-Rex, being big, probably didn't need a lot of feathers. This is kind of like how elephants and rhinos don't bother with lots of hair. They're so big they don't need the insulation. Further, all the skin impressions are from parts of the body like the belly, legs, and throat of T-Rex that are least likely to have feathers. The most likely regions are the thighs, the back, and the top of the head, but we have no impressions from there. Now, I personally think that T-Rex probably had no feathers at all as an adult, but I can't prove that, and if someone wanted to add some plumage in places most likely to have them, I can't say that they're wrong. But we also know that Eutyrannus, a close relative of Tyrannosaurus, was absolutely covered in feathers. So I don't know why this matters.
But they've actually came to a pretty strong conclusion that T-Rex definitively did not have feathers.
No, they didn't. They just didn't find any evidence that it did. And it only applied to adult T-Rex. Clarey is just lying here, and he's lying to support a conclusion that I myself think is correct. So it's not just that I think he's wrong.
And so but all the other theropods did. That's kind of what the paper says.
He was special.
No, not all other theropods did. We have very good reason to think that Ceratosauroids lacked feathers, because we have extensive skin impression from multiple taxa in that group, such as my own Ceratosaurus, as well as Carnotaurus, which cover much more of the body than we have for T-Rex, and they don't show any feathers. That's why I normally don't have feathers. It's why when you see art of animals like Carnotaurus or Majungasaurus, they don't have feathers either. That being said, feathers and proto-feathers are widespread in Dinosauria, and similar structures are seemingly universal in Pterosaurs. It's quite possible that this kind of filamentous skin structure is basal to all of Ornithodira, the group that includes pterosaurs and dinosaurs, and their close kin like Lagasuchids and Scleromoclids. We also have definitive evidence for feathers in many Sluriosaurs, closer to birds, which is basically all of them, including Oviraptorosaurs, Avomimids, and Deinonychosaurs.
But they've also found in China all these feathered animals as well. They have real feathers.
Yeah, like Microraptor gui, an animal that is not just in the same family as Velociraptor and Deinonychus, but it's even in the same subfamily as Velociraptor. So if Velociraptor isn't a bird, neither is Microraptor. Microraptor also confirmed a long-standing prediction that birds and their relatives that had some aerial capacity started with using both the forelimbs and the hind limbs for flight. This is because it was noticed that when chickens had a mutation that converted some of their leg scales into feathers, the feathers were themselves asymmetrical, like the remiges of bird wings. Lo and behold, Microraptor had remiges on its forelimbs and hind limbs. Isn't it great when you get a confirmed prediction from evolution? It's like it's the gold standard of science.
Not just these, hair-like structures. And that also is fed into their belief that dinosaurs evolved into birds.
Imagine finding dinosaurs that are definitely not birds, but who have veined bird feathers, and having that feed into your belief that birds are dinosaurs. What a wild thing to do.
Because they're identifying these birds that had bony tails, and they're calling them dinosaurs.
Mm.
Okay, so here's Microraptor, and according to what Clarey said, the only reasonable interpretation of this animal is that it's a bird with a bony tail, by which I assume that he means bird with a long tail, since all birds have bony tails. And here is Velociraptor, which according to Clarey is a dinosaur that has nothing to do with birds. Look at these skeletons. These are far more similar than they are different. That's why these animals are in the same subfamily, according to science. Clarey wants us to think that these guys are as different as a human and a turtle. I don't even need to explain it. These are virtually identical animals in all ways but size and the relative proportions of their arms.
So you got things like Microraptor.
Speak of the devil.
It had feathers on its back legs and front legs. Look, Archaeopteryx did. It had feathers on its back legs and front legs. As well, it had a bony tail. Everybody pretty much agrees that's a bird.
No, only creationists call Microraptor a bird that I've seen.
Although some are trying to change that into a dinosaur because they're the same.
Nope, dinosaurs are not the same as birds, just like mammals are not the same as whales. No one has to turn Microraptor into a dinosaur. It already and always was one. What's really happening is the creationists are trying to turn it into a bird while pretending that they wouldn't therefore have to do the same to basically all of Deinonychosaurs, like Utahraptor or Troodon. Really, this is the equivalent of someone looking at a wolf and a jackal and deciding that one is a mammal and the other one is actually a snake. It could not be more obvious that this is not just a matter of interpretation of the same evidence. To make this claim, you have to ignore essentially all of the evidence.
Right.
But really, that's all been pretty much shown to be a bird that flew like a pheasant.
Nope, pheasants, unlike both Microraptor and Archaeopteryx, have keeled sterna and an upstroke muscles for the wings that attach to the sternum with a ligament that uses the coracoid as a pulley to switch the direction of the applied force. Microraptor and Archaeopteryx had some aerial capability, but it was not all that much like a pheasant.
Couldn't fly really well, according to the computer studies. And Microraptor, I think, was almost the same thing. And all these other birds you find in China, they're really feathered, but they're calling them dinosaurs.
Yup, and here's where I point out that we're almost halfway through this talk, and you know what hasn't happened yet? No one has actually said what a dinosaur is. Now, I've said it many, many times before, perhaps most famously in my debate with Cantovand. I'll link that here. To sum it up, though, Microraptor and Archaeopteryx are known to be dinosaurs because they fit the formal definition of a dinosaur. Clarey can dispute that, but only by showing that they do not fit the definition, or at least challenging the definition. He hasn't even tried.
But they're not.
But I think there's enough, the anatomy of the back legs particularly.
What? That's where they're most dinosaur-like and also least bird-like. They don't even have fused metatarsal bones, which all crown birds do. Neither Microraptor nor Archaeopteryx have an inverted digit 1 like most birds do. What is he even talking about?
Like the late Dave Menton at AIG showed, that when you pull the back legs down and make them walk like a dinosaur, because dinosaurs and birds walk differently.
No, they don't. They both balance at the knees. But because birds have short tails, that forces them to bring their knees forward, which also brings them up, since that's how femurs work. But look, if you move the center of mass back to around the hips, which is more typical for non-avian dinosaurs, then the knee drops down to stay at the center of gravity, as seen in this adorable footage of a chicken walking with a plunger stuck to its butt as a counterweight. Also, here's a link to my coverage of Menton's lies about this topic. He also concluded, contra to Clarey, that Velociraptor is in fact a bird. Funny how Clarey won't go that far.
That you pull the legs down, and then there'd be too front heavy. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't, dinosaurs balance on their hips.
No, it's the knees. It's just that for most dinosaurs, the knees are posterior to the anterior-most part of the sacrum, so there's little practical difference.
Birds balance on their knees,
Just like all other bipedal dinosaurs.
and the thighs are kind of in their body.
Also laughably untrue. Look, here's a chicken that, as a result of a mutation, doesn't grow feathers. See how that thigh is right there? Yeah, not in the body. Now here's a whale. Do you see the thighs? No. Well, it has leg bones, so it has thighs. Turns out, though, that that's what it looks like when the thighs are inside the body.
And so they walk completely differently. That's also not talked about.
Then who did the chicken plunger butt experiment? A super secret cabal of scientists that don't report their findings except to me? It is talked about. He just doesn't bother to read those papers.
So the brain shape of dinosaurs is not talked about. The brain size of dinosaurs, the actual numbers, are not talked about.
I'm really tired of this walking pile of shit lying about science. In fact, you know what? Clarey did not catch me on a bad day. In fact, Clarey made the day bad as a result of this bullshit. Him. I hope he suffers.
And the back hips, where they walk on.
The back hips? As opposed to, what, the front hips? How many god hips does Clarey think animals have? Because, newsflash, it's always basically 2 or 0.
If it's a two-legged dinosaur.
Oh, maybe 4-legged dinosaurs are actually hexapods with 2 sets of hips and then 2 arms. Not sure would be handy. Too bad we just don't actually have any 6-limbed dinosaurs.
Turn into a two-legged bird. And they walk completely differently.
Right.
All they talk about is look, there's feathers. And the front arms, how the front arms were growing feathers to fly with or whatever, to catch animals or do what they were doing. They ignore half the animal.
All the other problems, yeah.
And so, to me, the biggest issue
is that you can't stop lying about science, because that's all this is. There are indeed papers on hind limb anatomy, brain anatomy, tail anatomy, etc. Just check Google Scholar, and literally tens of thousands of papers will come up. But they will almost all be not from creationists, because it's actually not the creationists who are leading the charge on research, on dinosaurs, on paleontology, on geology, or on anything. Creationists are in a constant game of catch-up that they'll never win, because they ignore inconvenient data, just like their good buddy Alan Fiducia. That's why you see creationists struggling to keep with older beliefs like species fixity until it becomes too much. It's why you'll get Henry Morris waxing on and on about how giraffe necks couldn't evolve, but then on the Ark encounter the representative of the giraffe kind has a short neck, meaning that the long neck did evolve. Basically, creationism just denies as much science as possible, but every so often, some previous science that they were once adamantly against becomes so obvious that even their own audience that they routinely lie to can't be fooled anymore, so they just admit that the science was right all along. The best part is that they then usually try to gaslight everyone into thinking that that was always their position, and even that they came up with the idea, when they very obviously did not.
is that you've already got birds and dinosaurs in the same rock layers, even before the most bird-like dinosaurs come along.
Already covered that. It's just not true.
There are a few similarities. A lot of the theropods had hollow bones.
Hollow bones, avian-style air sacs throughout the limbs, torso, neck, furcula, semilunate carpals that both dinosaurs and birds used to fold their hands along the radius, feathers of various types, minor stuff like that.
Basic body shape resembles maybe a bird, but...
Well, if we're going to allow Microraptor to be a bird, then the basic body shape of some dinosaurs is absolutely identical to that of at least some birds.
There's so many things about them to tell them there's not a bird. That's the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, of course non-avian dinosaurs aren't birds. That's the whole point. Like, what are we even doing here? If they were not different from birds, they'd just be birds. But the claim isn't and has never been that all dinosaurs are birds. Again, this is something that a toddler can understand. Toddlers can understand that their pet is a dog, but that not all dogs are their pet. That's all the brain development this needs. Tompkins is either a liar or he has the brain development of a 6-month-old baby. Since he seems to be able to control his limbs and vocal apparatus consciously, I find it hard to believe that he has the mental capacity of a newborn. Therefore, I am forced to conclude that he is in fact a liar. Shocking, I know. Anyway, that's all of this that I can take for today. I'll be back next time to finish this interview up. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, then hit dislike and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe, and if you haven't already, turn on all notifications so that occasionally YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Ferravara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Elleron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Sphincter of Doom, Vollus, John Ackerman, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.